Welcome back, guys. My name is Buck Whitaker, and today, the Amish have been eating food stored for 20 years without ever using a fridge. While the rest of the world depends on electricity, they rely on time-tested techniques that keep their food fresh for decades. Imagine reaching into your pantry and pulling out perfectly preserved peaches from 2 decades ago. That's their reality. But how do they do it without anything spoiling or losing flavor? We'll uncover a technique that U.S. companies spend millions to hide. The lost art of preserving food without a fridge. Canning is the superstar of Amish food storage, and it's not as easy as it looks. At first glance, tossing food in a jar and sealing it with heat might seem simple, but one wrong move and you're left with a disaster. The Amish have it down to a science, prepping jars with precision and knowing exactly when to pull them from boiling water. The high heat wipes out bacteria, and once sealed, those jars become time capsules of flavor. A jar of tomatoes canned today could be part of a dinner in 20 years, still holding on to the taste of summer like a well-kept promise. Before we dive deeper, it's clear that the Amish know something about food preservation that the modern world has completely forgotten, and what they do next will leave you questioning everything. But Amish storage doesn't stop at canning. Ever thought about burying eggs in ashes to keep them fresh? Sounds odd, but it works like a charm. Instead of letting eggs rot or crowding a fridge, they tuck them into dry wood ash, a trick that has kept eggs edible for months, even years. The ash blocks bacteria and moisture, preventing spoilage and keeping eggs as good as the day they were laid. And it's not just eggs. Root vegetables get the same treatment, stored in layers of ash to keep them crisp through the winter. Salt plays another big role in Amish food storage. Long before freezers, people used salt to pull moisture from meat, stopping bacteria in its tracks. The Amish coat cuts of pork, beef, and fish in thick layers of salt, letting time and nature do the rest. The result? Meat that stays safe to eat for years, no freezer burn or electricity needed. This method, called dry curing, locks in rich flavors and transforms ordinary cuts into something that could rival any store-bought deli meat. Then there's the underground storage method, root cellars. These aren't just basements for potatoes, they're carefully designed spaces where cool temperatures and humidity keep food from spoiling. Amish families store apples, squash, and onions in these hidden pantries, controlling airflow to prevent rot. The best part? These cellars work year-round, meaning they always have fresh produce even when snow blankets the fields. Lard, another overlooked tool, is a natural preservative used to store everything from meat to butter. The Amish pack cooked meats into jars and cover them with melted lard, creating an airtight seal that stops bacteria cold. This technique keeps food fresh for years without any fancy machines. And for those who think fat is the enemy, the Amish know better. Lard not only preserves, but also adds flavor and richness to their meals. Fermentation is another powerhouse in Amish kitchens. They transform cabbage into sauerkraut, milk into cheese, and cucumbers into pickles, all without a fridge. The fermentation process creates an acidic environment where harmful bacteria can't survive, meaning these foods stay safe and tasty for months, even years. Plus, they're packed with probiotics that support gut health, making them both practical and nutritious. Dehydration is yet another smart Amish tactic. Drying fruits, herbs, and meats removes moisture, making spoilage nearly impossible. They hang strips of beef to make jerky, lay apple slices in the sun, and dry herbs for seasoning. Without the weight of water, these foods stay good indefinitely, ready to be rehydrated when needed. It's a method that turns fresh produce into long-lasting pantry staples without the hum of a single appliance. The Amish also take full advantage of natural refrigeration techniques. In the winter, they harvest ice from lakes and ponds, packing it in insulated houses to keep milk and butter fresh all summer. Thick blocks of ice, sawdust, and careful stacking turn simple wooden sheds into makeshift freezers that last through the hottest months. This method, known as ice harvesting, is a testament to their ability to work with nature instead of relying on modern technology. The Amish have more ways to keep food fresh, and the next one is something most people don't use anymore. Why Amish food lasts longer? The final trick up their sleeve: vinegar and alcohol preservation. Fruits and vegetables submerged in vinegar last indefinitely, their flavors deepening with time. Amish families also preserve berries and cherries in alcohol, creating both a sweet treat and a long-lasting food source. These liquids create an environment where bacteria can't thrive, making them some of the oldest and most reliable food storage techniques around. What makes all these methods so impressive isn't just their effectiveness, it's the way they prove that modern conveniences aren't necessary for survival. The Amish thrive without digital thermostats, plastic containers, or expiration dates. They trust in simple, time-tested processes, storing food the way generations before them did. While the rest of the world panics during power outages, the Amish calmly reach for a jar from their shelves, knowing they have everything they need. Let's be real, most of us have a fire pit in the backyard. We use it for roasting marshmallows, burning junk mail, or just making an excuse to sit around and pretend we're in the wilderness. But imagine if we use those ashes for something actually useful. The Amish do. They've turned fireplace leftovers into a food-saving trick that's been around for generations. Now picture this. Instead of throwing out eggs before they go bad, you just bury them in ashes. Sounds weird? Sure. But it works. The ashes keep out moisture and bacteria, meaning those eggs stay fresh way longer than they should. If only we could do the same for our achy knees, right? But nature's got its own rules. You can save your breakfast, but your body? Not so much. The best we can do is stretch and hope for the best. Meanwhile, the Amish are over there stacking eggs in bins of ashes, watching the rest of us throw money away on food that spoils too fast. And it's not just eggs. Ever hear of fat sealing? Probably not, because we've all been brainwashed into thinking plastic containers are the only way to store food. The Amish take a completely different approach. Melt some fat, dunk your cooked meat in it, and let science handle the rest. Without oxygen, bacteria can't do their dirty work, so the meat stays fresh for months, sometimes longer. It's like nature's version of vacuum sealing, except without all the fancy gadgets that break when you need them most. Picture it. Crispy bacon, juicy sausage, even duck, all floating in a jar of lard, just waiting to be cracked open. Sounds gross? Maybe. But crack that jar open in 2 months and tell me that meat isn't still as tender as the day you cooked it. The French have been doing this for centuries, calling it confit, and their food is world famous. Meanwhile, we're over here throwing out leftovers because we forgot to eat them. Makes you think, doesn't it? Now let's talk about fermentation, another old-school trick the Amish swear by. We all know someone who's suddenly obsessed with kombucha, acting like they've discovered some magical elixir. Newsflash, people have been fermenting food for thousands of years. And unlike that overpriced bottle of probiotic juice, real fermentation doesn't require anything but salt, vegetables, and patience. It's a simple process, but mess it up, and you'll end up with a kitchen that smells like a gym bag. Sauerkraut, pickles, beets, you name it, they've been preserved through fermentation long before fridges were even a thing. The trick is balance. Too little time and your cabbage is just sad, soggy salad. Too much time and the smell alone might send your guests running. But if you do it right, you get crunchy, tangy, long-lasting food that just keeps getting better over time. Fun fact, archaeologists found evidence of people fermenting food nearly 10,000 years ago. That means someone was probably snacking on pickled vegetables while building the pyramids. If it was good enough for them, it's probably good enough for us. If fermenting food sounds useful, wait until you see how the Amish dry food so it lasts for years. The forgotten power of drying. But here's the kicker. Fermented foods aren't just about survival. They taste amazing. That first batch might make your kitchen smell like something crawled under the floorboards and died, but give it time. One day you'll crack open that jar and boom, perfectly preserved, flavor-packed food. Just don't forget to label your jars. Mistake a jar of sauerkraut for pickled beets and you're in for a real surprise. Forget those gas station jerky bags. Seriously, the Amish would laugh at that stuff. For them, drying food isn't about grabbing a quick snack for the road, it's about making sure their families don't go hungry when times get tough. Long before people had fancy machines to suck the moisture out of food, the Amish were using fire, sun, and patience to make sure their food would last for years. If you think a bag of beef jerky is impressive, Try biting into a piece of venison that's been sitting in a jar for 2 decades and still tastes better than half the stuff in your fridge. Some of their dried foods have been stored so long they could probably outlast civilization itself. And it's not just meat, fruits and vegetables go through the same process. Ever tasted an apple that's been dried for over 10 years? It's still good, just a little tougher, like your grandpa's old stories. One Amish family I met had shelves stacked with dried apples, pears, and meats, all looking like they could survive the next ice age. When you've got a house full of kids, wasting food isn't an option. Either you make it last or the food and the kids disappear fast. And trust me, those kids know exactly how to clean a plate. What's wild is how long this stuff can last if stored right. Some dried foods can make it 20 years, no problem. Imagine finding a forgotten jar of dried tomatoes that's older than your kid, and still perfectly edible. The idea isn't just about survival, though. Dried food is also lightweight and easy to carry, which is why it became a favorite for farmers, travelers, and later, even astronauts. That's right, NASA took notes from the Amish when they planned meals for space. If it's good enough to survive a trip through space, it's definitely good enough for a long winter on Earth. Trying it yourself isn't as easy as it sounds. Once, I left a tray of apple slices outside to dry, thinking I was being all old school and resourceful. Came back a few hours later, and the only thing left was a few crumbs and my neighbor's dog sitting there looking guilty. Turns out, the Amish don't just know how to dry food, they know how to keep it safe too. Get it wrong, and you end up with moldy fruit or jerky so hard it could break teeth. Done right, though? It's basically a survivalist's dream pantry. And then there's the real food goldmine, the root cellar. If you think a fridge is impressive, you haven't seen what a well-stocked root cellar can do. Forget about gold coins. For the Amish, a cellar packed with potatoes, apples, and carrots is worth more than treasure. These underground food bunkers keep everything at the perfect temperature and humidity level. No electricity required. Ever wonder why root vegetables last so long? It's because they were built for these cellars, cool, dark, and just damp enough to stop them from drying out. Walking into a root cellar for the first time feels like stepping into another world. Bins filled with potatoes, shelves lined with apples, and the air thick with the smell of stored food. It's basically a survivalist's dream. And it's not a new idea either. The Romans were doing the same thing over 2,000 years ago, using underground pits to store food long before refrigerators existed. The Amish just perfected the method, and honestly, it works better than a fridge. Apples stored this way actually taste better after a few months, their flavors getting richer like a fine wine, minus the headache the next morning. It's not just about storage either. These cellars double as social hubs. Neighbors drop by to trade tips, swap vegetables, and share jokes about how some of the turnips have aged better than people. One Amish elder told me that happiness is keeping your root vegetables stocked and your neighbors guessing how you do it. And judging by the way they run their cellars, he wasn't wrong. Is modern refrigeration truly necessary, or have we been tricked into relying on electricity when ancient methods work just as well? Tell us what you think, and remember to like and subscribe for more.